Welcome to the Planning for Life podcast with certified financial planner professional Russell Jacobs and financial life advisor Carl Coolidge. Carl and Russell will share creative strategies and ideas for overcoming challenges in your personal and financial life. Inevitably, life happens, and we will empower you to reach your destination. Thanks for joining us. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to another podcast with Carl Coolidge. Today, we have done a bunch of research on the 10 most common mistakes found in financial planning. Now, this is a very interesting list, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about which mistake it is, and then Carl is going to talk about how that's applicable and really why that's a mistake and what you can do about it. So these are the 10 most common mistakes in financial planning. You know, a lot of small business owners really fail miserably when it comes to financial planning because they take all of their money and they really throw it in to their business because that's something that they understand. It's something they can track. It's something that they can pretty much figure out what their return on investment is. And that is a big mistake because there's a diversification issue there. But one of the other major issues that we have found is that mistake number one is, in fact, not taking a financial snapshot. So, Carl, let's talk about what a financial snapshot is and then why it's so important for you to do that.
Well, a financial snapshot is really getting an understanding of where you are financially, meaning, what do you have as far as assets, where are they positioned, what do you have in the way of protection, vehicles like insurances, and that can be life, disability, long-term care. Can even typically look at your P&C policies, your homeowners, car insurance, et cetera, just to make sure that limits are where they should be in line. So it's really just doing a deep dive, not necessarily a balance sheet, a little deeper than that, but a similar process just to really have a handle on everything you have at the current time.
The second mistake is one that I feel that your firm does a great job with because you are such a financial planning focused firm, which is not having well-defined goals. What happens, Carl, if people don't have well-defined goals?
Well, we use the analogy a lot that if you don't know what you're shooting at, you will never hit the target. So again, it's the same concept as you've got to know what you're shooting for. And you've got to have a target in mind. So you've got to clearly define those goals so you can track your progress, so you can know if you're going to meet your goals. And if not, more importantly, you at least have an understanding and realize what you have to deal with in order to get on track for those goals. So we try to spend a lot of time up front really understanding what our client wants, what their goals are, their concerns, and helping them focus on those so they actually are able to meet them and have a clearly defined plan long term.
How flexible are those goals, Carl? Because I know a lot of people are hesitant to set goals because they feel like once they're in writing, they're inflexible. How do you build flexibility into your process?
Well, I think everything's flexible because as we tell our clients, this is their plan, not our plan. We're just here to help guide them and give them good counsel of again, how to make their plan most efficient. But every day things change. There's always changes in people's lifestyle. And that's why we really, encourage and work with our clients to come in. We try to make it as mandatory as possible on a yearly basis, just so we're up to date on everything that they're doing. And as you said, there always is a lot of changes. So we typically build in our planning flexibility around those goals. And what I mean by that is when you have certain monies earmarked for certain things, we want to build it in such a manner that it can be used for multiple goals if those goals change. So you may have on the horizon where you want to buy a second home long term. Well, we can have that money earmarked for the second home, but if something else comes up in between, it allows us to still use that money because we don't have it locked down somewhere. We have it flexible where you have access, and again, you can maneuver as you need to or see fit.
Mistake number 3 is not considering risks. I feel that this is one of the biggest concerns that people who are approaching retirement age, they don't really truly understand what risk is. How do you help communicate that, and how do you have that risk conversation?
Well, that's a tough one, Matt. We always fight that balance with everyone because, of course, everyone wants fantastic returns. They don't want to be left behind from what the markets are doing. But, of course, as you would be, as I am, you want the most return with the least amount of risk. And so it's finding the balance and really understanding what their risk tolerance is. And of course, we have tools that we help define that, but we also just have a detailed conversation of really giving examples and helping them understand, okay, you say you want these type of returns long term, but are you willing to take the level of risk that it requires to typically get those returns? And again, I think overall we do a pretty good job of it and have a good understanding of how much risk they're really willing to take. And we also look, for clients that come new to us, a lot of times at their existing portfolio and see what level of risk they have in the portfolio. And it's pretty interesting that a lot of times their portfolio will have a very different risk level than what their risk tolerance indicates, and they weren't aware of that.
With risk becomes a time risk. You were just talking about people really looking for really unrealistic rates of return or measuring their performance based off of something that is not even applicable and is not a good measurement of performance. But mistake number 4 is not understanding the value of time. You, as a firm, are a long-term financial planning firm. How do you educate people on time?
Again, as one thing I say in a lot of meetings is the one thing you can't get back is time. So a lot of people, you need to invest, obviously, as early as you can and as often as you can, because you can't get that time back. And so the perfect example is what we've gone through with the markets recently. In December, there's been, and really in the fourth quarter, a lot of volatility in the market. So a lot of people are getting their first quarter statements and seeing, that they've had losses for the last year or the last quarter. So really defining your time horizon is what's key or crucial when you look at those returns, because the market's going to go up and the market's going to go down. The key is, do you have a good asset allocation that suits your risk tolerance and suits your time horizon? Because money's invested for a long period of time should be allocated far differently than monies that are invested for a short period of time. And so if you can help clients and people can put that in perspective, it helps them understand the process a little more and why time is so important. It's always uncomfortable when you see returns that are negative in your accounts, but if you understand the parameters, I think the time is a big, big part of that.
Protection. So mistake number 5 has to do with not protecting your assets. What does that even mean?
Well, I think a lot of people want to focus on saving for retirement and getting money built up and all of those things, and seeing their balance sheet grow and seeing their retirement accounts grow, which is great. And certainly you need to be saving. But what a lot of people do is they skip the first step, which is protection. And what we mean by that is getting the proper insurance coverages in place. If something happens to you and you're unable to work, do you have disability insurance in place? If you were to pass away or someone in your family, do you have the proper life insurance to cover income needs, mortgages, other liabilities? If you are in retirement or getting close to retirement, have you considered long-term care needs that may come up, and have you explored insurance related to that? And that translates into, do you have, the proper home insurance, proper property and casualty, car insurance, things like that, to make sure they're fitting your situation so that you have all those protection mechanisms in place. It's like we talk about, a good analogy is like building a house. You don't start with the roof and go backwards. You start with the foundation to make sure it's firm, that you have everything, a strong foundation in place, and then you can start doing all of these other things that help you build wealth long term. But if you don't protect it in the beginning, it could totally derail your plans.
Protecting is one thing, and then sticking to a plan is another. Mistake number 6 is not making or keeping a budget. How often are you having that budget conversation?
I would say that is the most difficult thing we discuss with clients. And, we term it less a budget, more an expense worksheet or expense process, because we tell clients our goal is really never to tell you what you can spend or not. Our goal is to say, if you want X to happen, meaning you want retirement to happen, or you want the second home to happen, or you want college to happen, then you only have so much money in your budget or what you make annually. And so you're going to have to sacrifice some of these other things if you want the college, the retirement, the second home to work out. And so it's really helping our clients understand that we're not here to tell them how to spend their money. We're just here to tell them that if you want these things to happen, you're going to have to make sacrifices somewhere.
Fees are something that we hear about in the news all the time, but that's not one of the more hidden things that people don't pay attention to. They also don't pay attention to the tax ramifications of what their investments are doing or what their financial plan has. Now, I know you're not a CPA and you're not a tax advisor, but let's just quickly talk about considering the effects of fees and taxes on your overall investments.
Well, I think it's important to certainly monitor those and work with your CPA to make sure you're in the most appropriate tax situation. But it's really finding investments that suit what you're trying to do and making them the most efficient they can be for your tax situation. So everyone has a different level of income, a different level of expense, where they can get deductions. And again, you have to work with your CPA for all of those details, but it's important to make sure in our world that we're helping put you in positions where we're not exposing you to a lot of tax liability or tax risk based on how we can set up different accounts. So it to me is an important process, and that also has to do with the fees associated with it, which again get a lot of publicity and are certainly a concern. But if you find a sound long-term investment, you can usually find one that's very, very fee sensitive or appropriate to what you're getting.
Mistake number 8 I thought was interesting, and this is really one of the benefits of working with a financial advisor who has been in the business for a long time. And mistake number 8 is not learning from others' mistakes. Talk about that.
Well, I think, as they say, you learn from history or history will repeat itself. It's the same concept as everyone talks to their friends, colleagues, and obviously have conversations about financial things they've done or not done. And I think it's important that you just want to learn from things you've done in the past or learn from people around you and realize that you need to take a different course if you want a different outcome. And so they talk about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And so if you want to make long-term enhancements or long-term impact, then you've got to learn from your mistakes and say, what can I do or what can I change in order to be on a better track? And that's where I think selfishly that good advisors or good planners like we are can come in and really be that force to help you stay on track when you want to veer off. So it's, part of our job, in my opinion, where we can help keep you focused on what your long-term goals are and not to make some of those prior mistakes.
I feel that one of the mistakes a lot of investors don't, or a lot of the mistakes that they do make is not realizing that this is work, right? When you're talking about not budgeting, but you're talking about expenses, there's some effort that goes into it from a client side of this. Why don't you enlighten us on that one, please?
Absolutely. It's not an overnight process. You can't get to retirement in 1 week or 1 year. It's a slow, drawn out marathon, if you will. And so it's like anything else you do when you want good long-term results. You have to stick with it. And it is work, absolutely. You've got to make sure you're consistently saving. You got to make sure you're following your financial plan. You've got to make sure that you're keeping your budget, your expenses in check. You've got to make sacrifices on things that you normally would like to do. You've got to really watch where your money's going. So it is a lot of work. I mean, no different than if someone's trying to lose weight. You don't do it in 1 week. You've got to do it consistently for a long period of time. And it's really the same way with having a sound financial picture. It takes time to develop. You have to be flexible because things happen in life, so you have to be able to pivot, but you've also got to stick with it for the long term. And usually, if you stick with it long term and follow your plan, you're going to be in a pretty good position when it comes to retirement.
All right, Carl, before we get to number 10, I'm going to go through 1 through 9 very quickly. Mistake number 1, not taking a financial snapshot. Mistake number 2, not having well-defined goals. Number 3, not considering risks. 4, not understanding the value of time. Number 5, not protecting your assets. Number 6, not making or keeping a budget. Number 7, not considering the effects of fees and taxes. Number 8, not learning from others' mistakes. And number 9 was not remembering that it takes work. Now, number 10 might seem counterintuitive to people who work with somebody like you, a financial services professional, which mistake number 10, and to wrap up today's podcast, is not making your own decisions. What does that mean? I mean, aren't I hiring you to make those decisions for me?
Well, I think ultimately you're making the decisions about your financial future. I think where that comes in is really saying you want to find a qualified planner that can assist you and point you in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's your money, your future. You've got to decide what you feel is the most appropriate for you. We're going to give you all of the ideas, but you've got to understand those, what you're getting into, and make sure that you can follow those. And I think, talking to your spouse is important, having your family on the same page that you are, because then you all have common goals. And when you have to make some of those decisions or sacrifices, then it's very clear that we're all on the same page because we all have the same goal in mind. And so to me, that's what I would say is don't do it on your own. You want to understand the things that you're doing.
Is there anything that I missed? Were there any other mistakes that really jump out at you that you say, wow, that should have been number 11, or anything that you want to go back to on any of these 10 before we wrap up today's podcast?
One mistake I see is just sort of the topic of the month, or the thing that someone hears at a cocktail party or reads in the newspaper, hears on TV. It's the next hot stock. It's the next hot fund. And I think that's a common trap that a lot of people can fall into, which coincides with a lot of these top 10 we've discussed. But it goes back to there's not an easy way to get to the finish line. It's a process. It takes discipline. It takes time. And I think the key is you have to realize there's no overnight success. And so while this information is interesting and sexy, if you will, you've got to stick to the fundamentals in order to get to the finish line.
Carl, thank you very much for going over this list, and that last one was awesome. I'm actually kind of surprised that our research didn't show that because we hear about that so often, dinner parties, and then you as an advisor will get a random phone call from somebody and say, hey, I was told that we need to do this. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
Absolutely.
If you have not subscribed to the podcast, make sure you click that subscribe now button below. That way, every time Russell and Carl come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And it's also very, very easy to share these podcasts with your friends and family. If you know somebody who really could listen to these 11 ideas, these 11 mistakes that people make, please make sure that you very quickly just click that share button and make sure that it gets into the right people's hands. So for everybody at Jacobs, Coolidge & Company, this is Matt Halloran, and we'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.
The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions expressed and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Russell C. Jacobs III, Carl B. Coolidge, James Jacobs, and William Schwartz are registered representatives of and offer securities, investment advisory, and financial planning services through MML Investor Services, LLC, member SIPC, Supervisory Office, Jacksonville, Florida. Jacobs, Coolidge & Company, LLC is not a subsidiary or affiliate of MML Investor Services, LLC, or its affiliated companies.